Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. This is Reading Time with Pickle. We're going to continue on our journey at Brookline Asylum with Dan and his friends Abby and Jordan. Um, I realized my last video, I'd been recording for about an hour or so, but only 40 minutes uploads on YouTube for whatever reason. So until I get that figured out, and a full hour is recorded, but only 40 minutes uploads through YouTube. So until I have that figured out, I'm probably going to keep these videos rather at 30 minutes or shorter. Moving on. The novel, I had some issues with the novel, and I still do in its first act. It is picking up the pace, though. I feel like Jordan's character is fantastic, or how he's written at least. I do feel that Dan and Abby are still a bit bland. It's turning out to be more of a mystery than horror or suspense even. We'll see if that changes in the second act. We're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty with who is Dennis Haimline, the murderer? How is he associated with Brookline? How did he recover? Who is the warden? How is the warden connected to Dan? How is Felix involved in all of this? Is Abby telling the full truth or not? And is Jordan just the most regular kid at the asylum or at the university, kicked to the side? I accidentally called the university the asylum, so maybe this is actually an asylum. Anyways, let's continue on, and we'll start with chapter number 17. The next morning, it was time to pick a new set of classes, which meant that Dan had already been at the program for a full week and counting. In some ways, he couldn't believe that it had been that long, but by and large, he felt like it had been much, much longer. Dan planned to wait for Abby and Jordan at the admin building to see if there were any classes they wanted to take together. But when he got there, he saw that Abby was already moving from table to table in the art department area. She gave him a quick wave and then kept on going. Dan felt a pang of rejection, but pushed it down. So I might have been out of line last night. It was Jordan. He grabbed Dan and pulled him over to the theoretical mathematics table. Might have been, Dan asked. Yeah, I know you're on her side, Jordan began. But I swear I'm looking out for the both of us. Between you and me, I've seen girls like Abby go through this kind of identity meltdown thing before. This whole story about her aunt will blow over. You'll see. It doesn't exactly sound like an apology, said Dan. Anyway, what did Jordan even mean? Girls like Abby? Fair enough. Jordan inched forward towards the professor's table where the sign-up sheet waited. Listen, Abby's great. I love her and everything, and shame on me if this thing with her aunt is for real. I just can't get wrapped up in a bunch of drama right now. I'm here for math, not la-la crazy ghost hunting. I could have handled it better, though, that's for sure. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry I was a jerk last night. And about the Hydra thing, it's probably like you said, just Joe being an asshole. No harm done, Dan replied with a shrug. You sure? I'm sure. All right, then. They made their way to the front of the line, and Jordan signed his name on the clipboard in the tiny scrawl of a true mathematician. I'm going to head over and sign up for 20th century German Lit, Dan said. Jordan stuck his finger in his mouth and made a noise like he was choking, then smiled and went off in the opposite direction. It wasn't until the end of the morning, after waiting in one course line after another, that Dan acknowledged the sad truth. The three of them hadn't chosen a single class together. Dan waited among all the students hanging around outside, and he finally found Abby finishing up a conversation with some people he didn't know. He waited off to the side until she noticed him. Then, with a wave to her other friends, she came up and immediately started talking about all the new classes she was excited to take. Advanced portraiture, impressionism, graphic novel illustration. Jordan eventually found them, and his list of classes proved similarly alienating. Multivariable calculus, real and complex analysis. Dan could solve for zero, but this went far beyond the fundamental grasp of numbers. He gazed down at his own schedule. History, literature, more history. None of it matched up. As they were talking, Dan noticed that as friendly as their conversation might sound to an outside listener, Abby never once actually looked at Jordan, and Jordan kept directing his jokes at Dan. It was hard to deny now. In the space of a few days, a few hours, really, their whole easygoing dynamic had changed. Is this what it always felt like, getting close to people? The new class schedule meant a new routine. So Dan went from building to building, map in pocket, relearning his daily pattern. He hardly saw Jordan or Abby. They didn't even share common lunch hour anymore. True, they still met for dinner every night, but the conversation was now full of inside jokes from their different classes and stories for which the other two just had to be there. Jordan had said he'd apologized to Abby, and the fact that they could still sit at the same table seemed evidence of that. But she seemed distant and pointedly avoided any mention of her aunt. Dan wondered if she still planned to go back to the warden's office. He personally had no desire to ever go there again. On Friday night, Dan arrived in the dining hall to find Jordan waiting at their usual spot. 3 legal pads sat on the table next to his food tray, each one covered in his messy scribbling. As Dan moved closer, he saw the scribbles were numbers and equations, the kind of equations that had enough letters to look like sentences. Jordan didn't seem to notice Dan's approach, but stayed bent over one of the pads, his hand moving at lightning speed across the page. Homework? Dan asked, taking the seat across from Jordan. He couldn't remember ever seeing Jordan working outside of class, let alone on a Friday night. You could say that. Jordan scratched his right temple with the dry end of a pen. One of my teachers mentioned this problem that's supposed to be unsolvable, but the thing is, there isn't a proof yet that shows it's unsolvable. So I'm working on either the proof or the solution, whichever comes first. Call it a pet project. Or OCD. Dan meant it as a joke, but Jordan's head flew up, his unruly mop of hair springing out in all directions. Excuse me? Nothing, Dan said quickly. Jordan bent over his paper again. Then, with dinner in full swing and Jordan favoring numbers over Dan's company, Abby arrived. She hit the salad bar and grabbed a glass of orange juice, but instead of joining them, she took a detour to a nearby table where the art kids congregated. Dan thought of them as the art kids because they chain-smoked, dressed like Broadway extras, and wore ironic grandma glasses, even though maybe only 1 in 5 of them actually had bad eyesight. Jordan apparently noticed too, despite being nose-deep in math. They think they're it, he said. I didn't know she hung out with them, Dan cringed. He sounded and felt so stupidly high school. Us versus them. Outcasts versus in-crowd. Hi, Abby said when at last she came over. She sat down, placing a sketchbook on the seat next to her. I was just showing Ash and Patches some of my new work. Patches? Jordan said, looking up. Yes, Patches. Is there a problem with that? Mayday, mayday. Nope, Jordan snorted, low enough to sound like a cough. He brought his attention back to the legal pads. No problem at all. Abby shifted in her chair, sitting with one leg crooked under her. Despite her expectant face and the paper flowers woven into her braid, she was troubled. His heart sank when she said, "So I was thinking tonight might finally be the night. What do you say? Feeling up to sneaking around?" "I don't know. It's been a pretty long week." He wished they'd never gone into the old wing. It was changing them all somehow. It was changing Abby. Dan pressed on. "I was hoping we could just watch a movie or something light. Besides, if we get caught again, we won't get caught," she said flatly, ignoring the rest of what he said. She dug into her salad, eating so fast Dan couldn't imagine she had time to taste it. "So what do you say? Meet me at the bottom of the stairs at 11? She stopped assaulting her food to look at him, her gaze unwavering. I'm not sure," Dan replied, not knowing what to say. "Jesus, Abs, give the guy a break. He obviously doesn't want to go." Jordan flicked his eyes from Dan to Abby, a smirk on his face. "Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Jordan. I was going to ask if you wanted to tag along, but I'm sure crunching numbers is more fun." Abby stabbed a cherry tomato with her fork. The fork scraped hard against the bowl, sending a nails-on chalkboard shiver down Dan's spine. "Yeah, probably is. Maybe you can get your super awesome art buddies to go instead," Jordan shot back. "Maybe I will. And at least they won't go all a beautiful mind on us." "You wouldn't even begin to know what is happening in my mind," Jordan said. "Thanks to your stupid office, I've been having these dreams, nightmares. Like something got inside of me when we were down there and it's been trying to claw its way out. But what would you care? You're too busy thinking about yourself to worry about anyone else." Abby opened her mouth and shut it again. It was up to Dan to say the right thing. "What sort of nightmares?" he asked gently. "I don't want to talk about it." Jordan pushed a hand through his tangled hair, smearing ink across his forehead. The poor guy had never looked so unhappy. He took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. Dan knew better than to press him. After a minute, Jordan sighed. "Wait, I do want to talk about it." He looked around nervously as if to make certain that no one was eavesdropping. "It happened the night you guys went down into that basement, the night Joe caught us. I've had the same dream ever since then, exactly the same. I keep dreaming I'm in this cell, and there are these doctors, all in white, looking down at me, only they don't have faces. They have voices and hands and tools, but their faces have holes for eyes and noses and mouths. They put all these straps on me, lock me down," and Jordan's shoulders sagged. He reminded Dan of a wounded animal. "They show me pictures, and they shock me. They shock me over and over again. There's this white hot pain, and I can hear my parents talking somewhere behind the doctors. They're saying, 'He'll be better now. He has to get better now.'" "That's horrible," Abby whispered. I'm sorry, Jordan." Jordan nodded, staring down at his equations. Dan was frozen. He knew from Professor Reyes's class that they used to administer electroshock therapy to homosexuals in order to quote-unquote cure them. Did Jordan know that too, or had he dreamed it out of nowhere? And how about the fact that Jordan's dream was so similar to the one he'd had? Was it yet another not quite coincidence? Were they tapping into some Jungian collective unconscious? What was the connection? Jordan gathered up the legal pads and tucked his pen into his jeans pocket. Then he stood, gave a half smile, and picked up his tray. He hadn't touched his dinner. "I need a nap. I'll see you two around." Jordan wove his way through the tables, ignoring a few kids who called greetings to him as he went. I guess that means he won't be going back downstairs with us, Abby said, returning to her salad. Dan was shocked. That's a little harsh, don't you think? Well, it's true. Sighing, Abby let her fork drop into the bowl and leaned back against her seat. And the only reason you're upset is because you obviously don't want to go either. So why not just say no? It's not that I don't want to go with you, Dan struggled for the right words. I just think maybe this whole thing is far beyond being too weird. You're worried about your aunt. I totally get that. You want answers. I get that too. It's just that you don't need to help me, Dan. I can do this on my own. Abby snatched up her sketchbook. I want to help, he said. I want to help Jordan, and I want to help you too, and I still want answers. Then help! She caught her foot on the bench as she turned to leave and tripped. Grabbing a hold of the table before she could tumble to the ground, she dropped her sketchbook. Dan leapt forward to try to catch it. Too late. The sketchbook hit the floor and fanned open, revealing page after page of dark, twisted drawings. Some loose sheets scattered. Reds, blacks, touches of blue and gray, with a central figure huddled at the center of every piece. The white shift she wore and the vacant look in her eyes gave it away. It was the girl in the photograph, the girl Abby had drawn in her room. But there was something more going on in these illustrations. Suddenly Dan knew what Abby was thinking. Lucy, Dan murmured. You think the girl in the picture is Lucy Valdez. I've just been inspired, that's all. Abby grabbed the sketchbook and gathered up the loose pictures. I think maybe you should be looking for inspiration somewhere else. Shit, that hadn't come out the way he wanted it to. What would you know about it? You're not an artist, Dan. I don't know what you are. You hold things in. You never share your own opinions. Do you really believe me about my aunt? I don't even know. You get some weird email and a threatening note and say you want answers, but you won't even go down to the basement with me. What are you, Dan? Whose side are you on? She turned and stomped away, not giving him a chance to respond. He wanted to answer, to say something, but she was already with her friends at the art table, and the last thing he wanted to have was an audience while he tried to explain his worth. Anyway, what would he say? She was right. He did keep things to himself. He didn't like to take risks. He was cautious. He was closed in. There was so much he hadn't told her and Jordan, but she'd seen something in him before. Was that gone? What was he? She'd asked. He was many things right now, and he felt like he was being pulled into a million conflicting directions. He definitely wanted to be with Abby, and that felt like the strongest, clearest direction, but fear of what awaited them in the old wing flooded his body. When they went down to that place, something bad happened to them, and to their friendship. Dan cleaned up the table, his face hot with embarrassment. He took his tray and walked out of the dining hall without looking at Abby and her new entourage. Outside, the crisp air felt like a blessing. He paused and glanced over his shoulder, through the windows and into the dining hall. Abby had her back to him, but he could tell by the shake of her shoulders. She was laughing. Dan walked slowly back to Brookline, his thoughts heavy, his heart even heavier. When he got to his room, he slipped into his bathrobe and trundled down the hall to the bathroom. One of the showers in the cubicle behind him dripped, and the droplets pinging the drain with an uneven rhythm. As he washed up, he remembered what the warden had written about twisted roots. Where did insanity begin? With paranoia and insecurity like Jordan's? Or with strong-minded obsession like Abby's? Should he be worried that their behavior marked the first signs of something more serious? They are walking the line between genius and insanity, You know the line well. When he lowered his hands from his face, Dan saw he had scrubbed his skin almost raw. He dried off with a towel and then paused in front of the mirror. He always chose the same mirror. It had deep black scratches in the upper right-hand corner that looked vaguely like a word. And each night he'd decide it spelled something different. Tonight, it looked like help. Chapter number 18. Maybe you'd feel better if you went for a run. I have so much more energy now that I've started exercising. Have I mentioned that, Dan? Dan glanced up from his reading. Only 5 times, he muttered. Today. The point stands, Felix replied from the floor. He was in the middle of his billionth set of push-ups. For the past few days, Dan had basically kept to his room, watching TV shows online and occasionally reading materials for classes. He hadn't heard from or spoken to Abby or Jordan since that night they'd all blown up at one another. At dinner, Abby sat with her new art friends, while Jordan had apparently stopped coming to dinner entirely. So Dan had started sitting with Felix, listening to how much his roommate was enjoying all of his classes and how he wished the program were longer than 5 weeks. At least one of them felt that way. 75, Felix counted. He paused out of breath and switched to a kneeling position. His palms were red from the floor. You're welcome to join me at the gym this evening. It might really cheer you up, take your mind off things. Dan had to admire his determination. Protein shakes and daily trips to the gym were quickly turning Felix's once spindly physique into Fight Club material. He was so wiry, but Dan wouldn't want to pick a fight with him in a dark alley. Thanks, Dan said. Not sure the gym is my scene, though. You never know unless you try. Felix stood up and went to the closet. He pulled on a t-shirt and a windbreaker, then packed his sports bag with a roll of clean white socks and a water bottle. At least get out of the room, Dan, Felix told him when he got to the door. Take a walk, get some fresh air. You can watch Battlestar Galactica at home. Don't let this temporary setback ruin your whole summer. Okay. Dan watched Felix slip out and close the door. Thanks, Oprah. But of course, he was right. Dan got off of his bed, shut his laptop, and changed into clean clothes. Just as he reached for his cell phone, it started buzzing so violently that it nearly fell off his desk. Dan dove for it and was relieved to see Mom on the display. Hello? Hi, sweetie. His mother's voice was almost completely drowned out by the sound of TV in the background. Speakerphone? He asked with a chuckle. Really? Your dad wants to say hello too. No big deal. So how's it going? Do you still love college? Her enthusiasm was always infectious, and Dan found himself smiling despite his bad mood. It's not really college, you know that. I know, but still. Is that Dan? Hi, Danny boy. Hi, Dad. He pinched the bridge of his nose, pacing from one end of his bed to the other. So yeah, I'm doing fine, guys. Everyone's super nice, and the classes are great. How's Abby? His mother asked. Of course, that'd be the first place her mind went. She's fine, really an amazing artist, and it turns out Jordan's like a math prodigy. Oh, good. More than happy, Sandy sounded relieved. Well, just wanted to call and let you know we sent a package with some goodies. I think it should have gotten there already, but I didn't know what the mail situation was like where you are. There's enough in there to share with Abby and Jordan, too, if they like Little Debbie's and candy as much as you do. Thanks, Mom. I hope you're not studying all the time, his father said. You enjoy yourself this summer, all right? I will, Dan said, meaning it. He glanced around for his coat. But listen, I should get going and look for that package. It's pretty dark out already. Okay, Danny, let me know when you get it. We miss you. We miss you every day. Thanks, guys. I miss you too. Hanging up, Dan pulled on his jacket and left the dorm for the first time all day. The evening was pleasantly cool. He walked through the quad where Yi and his orchestra friends were out playing music on the grass. Dan took a moment to stop and listen. For the first time in days, he felt his mood lifting. He made good on his promise to his parents and set off towards the academic side. It would be nice to have something from home. And plus, Dan was hungry enough to eat a whole box of Little Debbie's to himself. Out on the lawn in front of the Wilford Commons, a resident advisor led a group of students through yoga poses in the grass. Dan skirted around them and walked to the side entrance of the building. A convenience store student union next to the cafeteria housed post office boxes for each student. Dan found his box in the middle cluster, numbering 3808. Crouching, he peered into the tiny glass window and was surprised that it was actually quite full. He used the little key he'd been given on move-in day and opened the door to pull everything out. Sure enough, there was a green piece of paper telling him he could pack up his package at the mail desk. There were also some flyers from the school, mostly information for students interested in applying for the college proper. There was a sketch Abby had done on the back of an assignment. He remembered seeing her doodle it during class. It showed the three of them in full suits of armor, standing on top of a fallen mound of books with "Scholastic Victory, Huzzah" written boldly across the top. Dan tucked the drawing away with a smile. He didn't know when she had put it in his box, but maybe it was a sign that she was ready to be friends again. He decided he would call her when he got back to the dorm. Finally, there was an envelope that simply had 3808 written on the front in thick black ink. Oh no, not again. Chapter number 19. Dan almost threw the envelope away. Who knew what threat it contained? But in the end, he had to know. With a feeling of dread, he opened the flap. Insanity is relative. It depends on who has who locked in what cage. The spidery calligraphic handwriting was the same as the Hydra note. This time it wasn't fear, but anger that shot through Dan. Someone was trying to freak him out, and it was working. Dan glanced around. Nobody was there, but he couldn't escape the prickly feeling that someone was watching. He threw the school papers in the trash and put the note in his jacket pocket. He retrieved his package from the store clerk with a shaky hand, then practically sprinted out of the building. Once he was back in his room, he grabbed the note out of his pocket and sat down at his desk. He Googled the sentences. It sounded like a quote, not something off the cuff. His suspicions proved right. The top few results showed that the line was Ray Bradbury's, from some radio play he'd written. So now what? He'd assumed finding the source of the quote would be helpful, but it wasn't. Whoever had put it in his mailbox had already left one ominous note on his desk. They'd been in his room. Dan spun around in his seat. Of course no one was there. Think. You're missing something right in front of your stupid face. Rummaging through his desk drawer, Dan unearthed the first note. He held the two of them side by side. He looked at the spidery handwriting, the paper, the ink. Everything matched up perfectly. Other than that, he couldn't tell much. He couldn't even say for sure whether the notes had been written by a man or woman. So, to sum everything he knew, a nameless, genderless stalker with a fondness for Ray Bradbury was out to terrorize him. He thought about calling Abby or Jordan, but decided not to. The notes were for him, not Abby or Jordan. Someone was trying to get at him. Dan ate microwave popcorn from his care package for dinner and then huddled under his blanket. He couldn't stop shivering. His mind was going around in little circles. He pulled out his phone and thumbed through his contacts. Finally, hovering over Dr. Oberst's phone number. If anyone could hear him without judging him, it would be her. And she had told him to call her at any time this summer if things got bad. But what would he even be calling to tell her? If he told her about how he'd imagined real rooms before he'd seen them, she'd probably ask for a therapy session. But the notes? How could those be his fault? Dan had never doubted himself as much as he did in that second. What if he was the twisted root at the heart of everything that was going wrong? He threw the covers off, jumped out of bed, and took the 2 notes from his desk. He ripped them in half and then in half again. He refused to let someone else string him along like this. He refused to let someone else keep him caged in his room, in his mind. He was going to go with his gut on this one. And his gut was telling him that he would find answers in the basement. All right, everyone. I'm going to end this broadcast. Chapter 19. We'll be starting chapter 20 next. Act 2, we're starting to see internal conflict between his group. Jordan, Abby, Dan have split. Now, that's one thing that I actually never really liked about Jordan, Abby, and Dan, starting off, Abby and Jordan were friends. Dan then joined them, but Dan clearly liked Abby. Jordan and Dan never had a connection. And what I'm hoping that is that in this fallout, Dan and Jordan kind of strengthened their friendship, but it seems like they've just all drifted apart. So Dan and Jordan never really were as close as friends as Dan and Abby, or Jordan and Abby. Abby was like the person who held all 3 of them together. What to say about Abby? I want to go back and see if she had known. I do recall the second time that they go to the basement, Abby was actually the one who was all for it. Jordan did not want to go. Dan was, I think, 50-50. And Abby was the one who was basically saying, pushing them to go. Let's take a look. So it's after their date. And again, I didn't like their date. Their date was basically exposition. Okay. All right. Let's see. So after their date, this was like chapter 9, chapter 10, Jordan was jealous. He felt left out. And I think this was the root of Jordan's insecurity in the group. Yeah. Abby's face brightened again, brightened as she added, "What do you say we check out the creepy old office again?" Dan actually did not want to go back down. It says, Dan wanted to agree with Abby. He wanted to be on her side and show her that she could count on him, but between this picture on her wall and the weird emails from earlier, Dan felt like he'd had enough scares for one night. So Dan was not the one who brought up going down there. So I think that Abby thinks this is her sister. Let's take a look at the very beginning. Okay, so here, interesting. At the very beginning, WDNRAFD. Now, since we know Dan's name, it says W something something DAN Dan Crawford, CRAWFORD. Phone's typewriter. It must have been closed suddenly. Oh, Warden, Dan Crawford. Okay. So we found in chapter number 4, Dan is the warden. And they go to Dan's desk. Now, Dan was the first one, prompted by Felix. Dan was the first one who mentioned going to the basement, to the old wing. And Abby agreed quite quickly, saying that she's always looking for inspiration. Jordan was hesitant. The second time, and then they discuss the office, which now looking back, it's definitely Dan's office. And the photo, rather, which may or may not be Abby's aunt. Now, I want to know how Jordan has to do with all of this. Jordan has never wanted to go to the basement, first time nor the second time. Third time, he just flat out refuses. Okay, so I guess we're going to start in chapter, what is it? 20 next time, was it? And I think we're starting to get into some material. So what we know, what we've discovered, Dan's probably the warden. Who Dennis Haimline is, who knows? But we can basically surmise that the warden's name was Dan Crawford. I think that they are all patients or related to patients in some way. Anyways, I'll end this here because I'm kind of just word vomiting. And we'll pick up next time. Thank you as always for joining me, and have a great day.